Hello and welcome to the You Can Do Anything You Put Your Mind to podcast. Kind of a mouthful for a podcast name, but we are going to be rolling with it. My name is Margaret and I am going to be your host of this podcast, and I am so excited to be here with you. Creating a podcast is something that I've always wanted to do, and I personally love watching podcasts on YouTube. That is where I listen to and consume most of my podcast content. I love being able to see somebody sit down and talk directly to you. I like listening to a podcast in the ears, but watching somebody talk through a podcast is just an experience that I enjoy so much. And probably about a month ago, I saw a video from Anna Sitar, and she basically created a video, and it was if I had a podcast, this is what it would be like. And it was a whole, episode of her fake podcast. And I think it got the wheels turning for me. And creating a podcast is something that I have always wanted to do. I love to talk. I love to talk to the camera. I think a podcast medium is something that would be really enjoyable for me. I have just always put it off because I didn't know what to call it. I didn't know what I would talk about. I didn't know if anyone would listen to me. And I think, what better time than right now to try and create something new and create something that I am proud of, create a different way for all of us to connect with each other. So that is kind of where this podcast is coming from, where the inception is coming from. I'm really excited to be able to sit down and talk and have more in-depth conversation. For those of you that are maybe finding this video or this podcast for the first time and you don't know who I am, you've never heard of Margaret Elizabeth, you don't even know what Pilates is. Hi, I am Margaret. I am a certified Pilates instructor. I teach Pilates full-time. I teach in a virtual studio. I also teach equipment Pilates in person. I create content online as well as a means to market my business. I don't know that I necessarily consider myself a content creator, but I know a lot of you would disagree. I have a YouTube channel and Instagram and TikTok, and that's kind of what I've been doing for the past. I've been teaching Pilates. I'm going into my 5th year of teaching Pilates, but I have been in the online space for the last 3 years, and I have built connections with so many of you, which has been so wonderful. And yeah, a lot of you, ask for a podcast and love just hearing me talk about things, and I love that you guys are so willing to stroke my ego. It's lovely. It's really lovely. But so here we are. And this podcast is not going to be like a Pilates podcast or a fitness podcast, a health podcast. It's not really going to be any of those things. If you watch any of my videos on YouTube, I end every single video by saying you're awesome and you can do anything you put your mind to. And that tagline is going to kind of be the red thread that carries us through into this podcast, because I believe at my core that I can do anything I put my mind to. I believe that you can do anything you put your mind to as well. And I have proven that to myself time and time again. And I feel like it is part of my job as a Pilates instructor, as just a person on the internet that creates content. I feel like it is a part of my job to inspire you and make you feel capable, make you feel like you truly can do anything, because I know that energy and that power is what can help people change their lives and can affect change in many different facets of life. So this podcast is called You Can Do. It feels redundant to say This podcast is called You Can Do Anything You Put Your Mind to. We are here in episode 1, and I'm not even going to release these podcast episodes until I have 5 episodes filmed, edited, ready to go, because I have a horrible habit of wanting to do too many things at one time, trying to do it all, burning myself out, and then having to essentially quit something. And I don't want to have to do that with something like this. I want to be able to sustainably create podcast content, create podcast episodes. I really want that for myself, because I think not only do I need a space to be able to talk about things, but I feel like we as a community need a space to be able to organically chat with each other, whether it's in the comments or, chat about topics outside of just like a Pilates context. I feel like, we kind of need that, and we're at that point. So I want to make a plan to be able to, see if I can sustain this long term. There's always a lot of things going on in my life and with my job and just everything, but this is something that I feel really energetically drawn to, especially lately, but like right now, I just want to almost rip the Band-Aid off and just do it and get going. So if you're listening to this or you're watching this video on YouTube, hello and thank you for being here. In this first episode, we are going to essentially talk about what I would call my villain origin story. I feel like a lot of you know me as a Pilates instructor, and that's kind of where your knowledge of me ends, and that is great. And I am a Pilates instructor, and that is my life, and that is my career, but I think a lot of people don't know my backstory and where I came from and how I got to where I am today, and we're going to be talking about that here. So without further ado, let us jump right into the episode. So like I said, we're talking villain origin story, and I'm not calling it a villain origin story because I think I am a villain in this story, but really we're going to be talking about big life events that have happened for me that have kind of almost flipped a switch and turned me into the person that I am today. I think whenever I am talking about my story and my life and where I came from, it's always really important for me to start when I was young, like 8, 9, 10 years old. When I was young, my parents, like everyone, they tried to put me into sports. So when I was really young, I was playing soccer, I was doing basketball, I played a little bit of softball. But when I was going into the 4th grade, so I was 9, I think. When I was 9, my mom put me into a theater camp. It was like a 3-week theater camp. It was something different than what I had traditionally been doing over the summer. My parents put me in a lot of sports camps because that's what my friends were doing, and they needed to put me somewhere. I hated sports camps. I am not really an athletic person at all. My hand-eye coordination is not so good. My reflexes are pretty slow. I also just don't have any desire to play a sport. So they would put me in sports camps, but I don't know how effective that was for anybody. My mom took me to a community theater production over the summer and got a flyer for their summer camp and enrolled me for a session, and I was completely hooked on musical theater, and I was 9. From there, I started to perform in community theater productions of a bunch of different musicals. I did, oh my gosh, from when I was 9 to 18, I did probably about 50 musical productions. I used to be able to sing pretty well. I could kind of dance, and my acting was okay. But in a community theater setting, if you are even remotely talented and you can memorize lines and, you want to work hard, you can, get into more leading and principal roles. So from when I was 9 to 18, so 9 years, almost 10 years, I was doing these musical productions, and I played a lot of different roles. I played Belle in Beauty and the Beast. I played the narrator in Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat, if you know that one. If you know anything about theater, you'll know that for sure. What else? Oh, and in my high school production of Grease, I was Rizzo. That's a pretty big deal, I think. But yeah, I did theater growing up, and I think my experience doing theater and being in that kind of environment shaped the way that I felt about myself. It shaped my self-confidence. It had an impact on my relationship with food and with exercise and with my body. It really, it shaped me into who I am today, and it shaped me into the young adult that I became, leaving high school and going into college. I think when I was doing theater and I was maybe, 14 or 15, that's when I started to realize the effects of how I looked and how that affected the roles that I was cast in. in performances. So that's when there was like a switch in me that realized, oh, if I am skinny, if I am smaller, I am cast in more leading roles. If I look this certain way, I am cast, in a role that is the lead of the show. I am cast as somebody that has a love interest instead of being cast as the traditional motherly role. From, I'd say, when I was 10 to really until I was 18, I was cast in traditionally motherly, maternal roles because of how I look and how I present myself. I am 5'7", so I'm taller than a lot of other girls. I was taller than a lot of other girls my age. I was taller than a lot of the other boys. And I think just because of my height and just the way that I look, I'm naturally just like more mature than other people. Like I've had boobs since I was 10. So I think I got like kind of typecast into motherly roles, and that kind of messed with my head a little bit. But once I was 15, like going into 16, I had, I don't know, my hormones were changing. I think I had lost a little bit of weight, and I had very much slimmed down, and it wasn't on purpose. It was just like, honestly, I think it was just hormonal. And with that change in how I looked, I saw a direct effect on how I was cast in productions. And from that point on, I associated like being skinny or existing in a smaller body as something that was rewarded with a better role in a musical. So that's something that I think really shaped me and my just relationship with my own body. Coming out of high school and going into college, I had like horrible stomach pains before I was going off to college, which now looking back, I think was probably stress related, but I was having horrible stomach pains like every single day. I had previously struggled with really severe migraines when I was like 14, like my freshman year of high school. But the summer I turned 18, I was suffering with really bad stomach pains. And looking back again, I think it's probably stress related. I think also maybe it was potentially like related to what I was eating, but because I was having these horrible stomach pains, I went gluten and dairy free. So I had to cut out a ton of food, which again impacted my relationship with myself, with my body, with food, with everything. So I had to eat really healthy, not necessarily by choice, like out of necessity. I had to make that switch, and it made going into college and navigating food and navigating food as it relates to creating friendships and being in a sorority and just like being around people, drinking, like all of that. It really, it had an impact on how I navigated college, I think, because I couldn't have gluten, so I couldn't drink beer. I had to ask those questions before I was really doing anything. When I went to college, I joined a sorority, and we had meals at the house every single day. I had to ask, what's in this food? I had to be really careful about what I was eating, and I think like I don't know, it affected my relationship with food. For sure. Going into college, I think because because of my relationship with my body and with food and with exercise, and I think my need and my desire to control things when it came to my health, I went into college majoring in nutrition. I wanted to be a dietitian. I had that major interest, I think, out of like personal interest, right? I had personal interest, not necessarily because it's something I wanted to pursue as a career, but personally, I was very interested in that. However, in college, I took one chemistry class and I was like, nope, I don't think it's for me. I got a D in chemistry. It's like the only D I ever got. Ever in college and high school and anything. I had to retake chemistry, and I switched my major like 3 times. I then went into public health as my major, and I wanted to do like health education, health promotion. Health was like a really big thing for me, and I think that stems mostly from me wanting to have control over how I look, how other people perceive me, and just from really almost like a very vain perspective. Like I wanted to pursue all of these things because that was all I cared about, was honestly how I looked and staying in shape and being fit and all of these things, because I didn't play sports, right? So I didn't have something that could naturally just keep me in shape. I really had to work at it. And I think that's just what I felt most drawn to when I was going through college. My villain origin story continues. When I was in my senior year of college, this was in 2017, like going into my last semester of college, right around Thanksgiving, I started to have really random and strange pains in my toes and in my ankles, and my feet were really swollen, and it continued to progress, and I got to a point that I was having a really difficult time walking. Doctors couldn't figure out what was going on. It got progressively worse and worse and worse. There was, I was basically bedridden my whole last semester of college, and finally, I went to a rheumatologist and they discovered that I had rheumatoid arthritis. I didn't want to accept that I had an autoimmune disease, that I had something going on that was really beyond my control, because in my mind, I was doing all of the right things to be able to keep myself healthy, to be able to keep myself fit, to be able to keep myself like living the way I want to be living, and life and my body just threw this wrench at me. And they said, "Oh, you think you're doing things right? Ha ha, deal with this. You're not gonna be able to walk." So yeah, I went to a rheumatologist. This took a lot of like process of elimination and going to a lot of doctors and doing a lot of tests. It was over probably a period of 6 months that it took me to figure out what was going on. I went to a rheumatologist. I got on, a treatment plan. And that kind of that was like my first big, not only health scare, but big life event that I think shaped the rest of what I was doing. So I graduated college. I could barely walk across that stage to get my diploma because my feet were so swollen. I just started medication for RA, but I graduated college. I didn't have a job lined up because honestly, I was just trying to get through. I was just trying to get through. That last semester of college was so difficult for me, but I was just trying to get through. I didn't have anything lined up. I was still pretty passionate about health and fitness, but now I had something from the outside that was affecting, my relationship with health and fitness. It was affecting how I was able to work out and move my body. And at that time, this is coming out of 2017, I wasn't quite ready to accept that I had limitations. I didn't really want to work with myself. I wanted to be able to get back to where I was. I hated that I couldn't keep going at the pace that I was going. I hated that I had to modify things, that I couldn't tuck my toes under, that I couldn't walk 5 miles without being in excruciating pain. I had a really hard time accepting all of those things. I had a really difficult time accepting that I did have arthritis. It was very difficult for me to come to terms with. But about a year after I graduated, I had been going to the gym. I had been doing my normal things. I started really casually lifting weights in college. So I went back to that same thing. About a year later, when I felt like my mobility had returned and I wasn't in excruciating pain. About a year later, my mom had started going to reformer Pilates classes, and she was like, I think you would really like this. You should try it. And, if you don't like it, then you never have to go again. But I went to a class and I felt very challenged by Pilates. I liked that I was able to make modifications, although I was still working on my inner acceptance of making modifications and maybe doing something that wasn't necessarily what was being instructed at the time. But I liked it, and I continued to go and take Pilates classes. And at this time in my life, this is about a year post-grad, I had started a sales job at a big company. I was an account manager. I had just started this job at the beginning of 2018, and in May of that year, I started doing Pilates. I wasn't passionate about the job that I was in. I have a public health background. I just had kind of a passion and a drive for that. And I knew I wanted to do something else. So I kept doing Pilates, kept working at my job, and maybe about 4 or 5 months into me taking Pilates classes, I got an email that the studio I was at was going to be doing a teacher training. Signed up for the teacher training. It was supposed to happen that October, but they had to push it back to January. So in January of 2019, I went through my Pilates teacher training, my first Pilates teacher training, and I was like completely hooked. I went through that training. I started teaching classes in March of 2019. And by like June or July, I was like, how do I get out of my full-time job and how do I teach Pilates full-time? Like I was completely hooked. I wanted to like overhaul my whole life, like do that whole thing. And by, let's see, in December of 2019, I had accepted a full-time job with the studio that I started teaching at. So I like was able to do exactly what I wanted to do. I was able to, you know, work in the setting I wanted to work in. Being a Pilates instructor was so flexible. I was a studio manager and I oversaw 3 studios, which was a lot of responsibility for me, but teaching classes was also a part of the role. So to me, it was like all the boxes are checked. I get to do everything I want to do and I get a consistent paycheck. So, you know, what more could I ask for? So I started that at the beginning of December of 2019. We go into 2020, January, everything's fine. February, everything's fine. We get to March of 2020 and, you know, the COVID pandemic is really at the forefront of the news, is at the forefront of everyone's mind. At the time, I didn't feel like I was high risk, but I had people around me that were concerned for me because I was, you know, because I'm immunocompromised with my rheumatoid arthritis. So initially I wasn't like, oh no, I'm unsafe. I cannot teach in this environment. I can't be around this many people. It was the people that I had around me that were like, whoa, are you seriously teaching right now? Like you are immunocompromised. You're at a much higher risk than, you know, anyone else to be teaching. And other people got in my head for sure. And rightfully so. Like I should have been concerned, but nothing's going to get in the way of me and Pilates. I should have been concerned, but I wasn't. But I let other people get into my head and I became very fearful of teaching and being around people. I didn't feel comfortable in the studio setting, and right before everything shut down, this is when I was living in Phoenix, right before everything shut down, I had to call like the owners of the studio and I was like, I'm not comfortable doing this. I need you to find somebody to cover my classes. And then they were like, yep, okay, no questions asked. And then the next day they, you know, all the fitness studios had to shut down. So you guys all know what happened with COVID. You know, the whole deal. Everything shut down. In Phoenix, fitness studios could open back up in May. So I was basically on like a 2-month break from work. I had like reduced pay, but I had no work to do at home. So I was basically on like a 2-month vacation. May rolls around and they're planning to, you know, reopen the studio. Everyone's going to be in masks. We're doing this whole COVID protocol. And the studio managers were supposed to come in and we were going to do work ahead of time of studios opening back up. And they were like, okay, everyone wear a mask and we'll all meet at this studio and we'll all, you know, do all this work together. Me being terrified of COVID and me having people in my ear saying you should be terrified of COVID because you're immunocompromised, I was freaked out. I like had a mask. I brought it with me. I'm, you know, the day comes that we're going into the studio. I'm walking into the studio. I have my mask on. I'm freaked out because I haven't been really anywhere outside of my house in 2 months. I get in there and I'm the only person wearing a mask. And I was like, I could feel just like my chest tightening. I could feel, I could feel like a panic attack just coming on. And I was there all day. People are talking about how they've gone to restaurants and they're, you know, nobody is wearing a fucking mask. And I'm just sitting there like visibly terrified, like so scared. And I came home that day from my meeting and I just cried the whole way home in my car. I was having a panic attack in the car. Like I was really not okay. And I had to come back from that, talk to my manager, and I was like, I'm not comfortable with how this is going. And I was really uncomfortable yesterday in the studio. And, you know, if you guys are going to be enforcing these policies, like I need you to enforce them. And obviously they're not being enforced. So I can't do this, and I'll let you know if that changes, but right now I can't do it. This was in May of 2020. In June, they basically were like, if you're not ready to come back and teach, then you don't have a job anymore. So I was essentially fired from my job teaching Pilates, and because I needed a job to survive, I took a job at a mortgage broker's office, just like doing front desk admin stuff. And at that point, that is really where I started to just like explore other ways of teaching Pilates, because I knew working at a front desk at a mortgage office was not going to be fulfilling for me. You know, I knew that Pilates was what I wanted to be doing. I just didn't know how I could do it safely. And because I was having panic attacks, and because I was very anxious about COVID and my immunocompromised state, because of that, I worked with a therapist for probably 3 months. And she helped me kind of detach my self-worth and my identity from being a Pilates instructor. She was like, you know, you are yourself outside of what you do for work. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I am a Pilates instructor. That is how I identify. That is my whole life. That's my whole like livelihood. It's my career. It's everything to me. That's how people know me. But we really worked on kind of dismantling that. All that to be said, I started working at this job that I didn't like, but it gave me a paycheck. And that is really when I started to create Pilates classes and put them on YouTube. It's really when I started like posting stuff on Instagram and posting on TikTok. I'd been doing like stuff on TikTok before, but it wasn't really like, I don't know, it wasn't really Pilates focused. It was just more of something for me to do. But I'd say in June into July of 2020, I really started like thinking like, okay, I want to teach Pilates. How can I do it safely? Online seems like the way that I can do it safely. So I started to post videos on YouTube. And then, you know, time goes on. In October of 2020, I was like, I think I'm ready to go back to teaching in person with a mask on, you know, with all these other precautions. So I reached back out to my previous manager at the studio that I had been teaching at. It's like, hey, you know, I'm ready to come back. I want to make a plan, you know, for 2021 to come back and teach in person full time. And we made that plan. And then in January 2021 is when I went back to teaching in person full time. I was teaching about 20 to 25 classes a week. And that's also when I started my virtual studio and started teaching classes on Zoom. So 2021 is like the year that, that everything really came together. And I think out of the tragedy and the upset that like getting fired from my job was, out of that tragedy, I was able to come back essentially like stronger, right? And be like, okay, I'll teach, but I'm also going to start my own thing. And for me, when I started to teach classes virtually and teach in a way that, you know, people had to pay me for, teach in a way that was my job, I started to do that with the intention of like making that into my full-time income, because at the time I was dating my now husband. He took a job that took him out of state. So we were long distance for a little bit. I was like, okay, I need to use 2021 as a year to build up my business so that I can move out to Colorado, be with my then boyfriend, and like I'll have a job and I don't have to worry about teaching at a different studio or doing any of these other things. That's what I did all of 2021. I was so focused on building my business, building up my social media presence, just like doing all of those things. Let's see, we got to the end of 2021. I moved out of Phoenix, where I had lived basically my entire life. I moved out of Phoenix, moved to Colorado to be with my fiance, and I took my business full time. And I took my business full time before I really should have, before I was really prepared to, but it was something I had to do. I had to take the leap. I had to remove the safety net. And that's what I did. All of 2022, I taught only virtually, with classes on Zoom. I had classes on YouTube. I was kind of doing the whole thing. I burnt myself out like horribly bad just teaching online. I think because I felt lonely. I felt disconnected, and I felt like I needed to like fill this void. I have a problem where I try to do too much, and I think that really came into play in 2022, really 2021 and 2022. I was trying to do all of these things to A, make ends meet, but B, to create an environment that people wanted to be in, that my clients wanted to be in. I was trying to create something that, people would pay me for. And I had a really difficult time figuring out what the right balance of work was. My husband and I got married, and we moved at the beginning of 2023, which this kind of brings us up to current times. Once we moved, we're now in St. Louis, I got a job teaching in person, and what I have learned is that the best thing for me is teaching in person and teaching online. It gives me the best mix of both worlds. But that is kind of my origin story and how I ended up where I am today. I've taken a lot of roads that have been difficult for me. They've been difficult. They'd be difficult for anyone. I have done a lot of things that people would look at and say, oh gosh, I could never do that. I wouldn't even know how, and I did it. I have, I've done a lot of research on my end to get to the places that I am today. And I think at the core of everything, I believe that I am capable of anything. And I think I have like my parents to thank for that. My dad is like a little bit delusional in that way, that like he encouraged us to do everything and try everything and really give things our best shot. He is that kind of person that it's like, okay, Dad, well, I'm going to do this. And he's like, all right, well, how can I support you? How can I, how are you going to do it? What's going on? All that stuff. So I think that is something that's really shaped me into who I am and why I am so confident in my abilities. So with my villain origin story out of the way, I think something that I want to talk about with every episode is the limiting beliefs that have come along with really any situation that I have been in and any situation that I've had to overcome. So in terms of getting from point A to really point Z for me right now, but from moving through my journey, the biggest limiting things that I have had to deal with are kind of limiting beliefs around my self-worth. I've had to deal with a lot of like internal thoughts of I'm not good enough because I don't look a certain way. I've had to deal with a lot of that, and that's been a very difficult thing to overcome. I've had to deal with a lot of, well, I can't do that because I don't know how. I've never done it before. I've dealt with a lot of that in my career in general. I've also dealt with a big limiting belief, like a money belief, like, well, Pilates instructors don't make any money, so I'm not going to be successful at what I'm doing, or I'm always going to have, a different full-time job, and Pilates will just be a side hustle for me. I think those are the three biggest things that I have had to deal with in the whole of my origin story. And I think the nice thing about having like done this for now almost 5 years, I have gotten into a good habit of talking myself out of those things. And those are things that come up too when I talk to other people that want to start teaching Pilates, they want to start teaching online. It's always like, well, I don't look a certain way. I can't do all of these things. I don't know how to do the tech. It's always, I can't, or I don't know how. It's always that. And I have gotten myself into a really good groove of being just like borderline delusional, but also knowing that I can always figure something out. And knowing that I am the only version of me, and I am going to do things the way that I know how to do them and do them the way I want to do them. And people will connect with that. It doesn't matter how I look. It doesn't matter what I wear. It doesn't, all of those superficial things don't matter. It doesn't matter that I am literally filming inside of my house. I only ever film in my house, it doesn't really matter, the aesthetics of things. And I remind myself of that. I don't have 6-pack abs. I don't have, a dance background. I don't have all of these things. And I think because of those things, it makes me a more well-rounded teacher. It makes me be able to take my personal life experience and help other people that have had similar experiences. We'll talk about this more for sure in terms of limiting beliefs, like with money. It's always been like, oh, well, Pilates instructors make no money, so I'm not going to be successful doing that. And I think once you realize that you can make money doing what you want to do, you can make money, you know, like having your own business, like you can do all of those things successfully. You realize that like the money block is just kind of like stupid. You're like, well, okay, I can see the numbers. I can do this, obviously, and I can do it again and again and again. Those limiting beliefs, I think, have carried me through a lot of things. When we get into future episodes of this podcast, I want to be able to like give advice to you guys, whether you're nervous to try something new, you're trying something new and you're not sure what to do next, maybe you don't know what steps to take. I want to be able to include you guys in this podcast. So my plan here is for episode 5 to be able to like take your situations and give you some advice on how to start or where to go, give you advice on how to deal with your own limiting beliefs, maybe deal with anything else that's going on, give you a little bit of a pep talk and a game plan. That is my plan for like every 5th episode. I want to get you guys involved. I watch a podcast called Perfect Person by Miles Bonsignore. If you know him, great. I love his podcast that he like calls in or he has people call in and he talks to people real time on the podcast. I think that is amazing and I want to be able to have that connection with you guys, and I think it will be a really good way for me to effectively give you guys a little bit of help. I also watch, I don't know what her full name is. She does TikToks and her TikToks are always like Dear Hayes, and she has people write in and it's like, you know, she does like advice TikToks basically. I don't know that I would qualify myself as being like really good at giving advice, but I would love to do something like that because I know I have a lot of people that reach out to me asking questions like that, and I would love to be able to answer, answer people's dilemmas in a format like this. So I think with that, this can wrap up our first episode. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Hopefully that was interesting for you. Hopefully you learned a little bit more about me. We're going to continue to dive a little bit deeper into things I thought I could never do, moments where I've had to tell myself that I can do anything that I put my mind to. We'll go over the origin of my tagline. And, we're going to have a fun time on this podcast. So if you enjoyed this episode, please let me know. Please like the video, leave me a comment, let me know what other kinds of episodes you would want to see. I would love to be able to do interviews on this podcast and talk to friends, family, anyone that has, similar stories of like dealing with hardship, dealing with limiting beliefs and feeling like they've come out on the other side and talking about that. I guess this podcast will be kind of like a wellness podcast, a lifestyle podcast, a mental health podcast. I don't know. We'll see. But hopefully you enjoyed this podcast. If you're watching this on YouTube, thank you so much for watching. Remember, you're awesome. You can do anything you put your mind to, and I will see you back here for our next episode.